I also like talking about maybe there's some things happening in the world that
Sure.
if you understood, you might realize why you have been the way you've been and give yourself a new level of power
Yeah.
to do something even bigger and better and live a more fulfilled life and
100%.
more impactful life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, take that
Speak to
wherever
that.
take that wherever you want to go.
Well, knowledge is power.
Mm.
You know, it sounds very cliche, but like I'm a truth seeker because I like having choices. I don't like being told it's A or B, black or white, this or that. I like knowing that there's a range of spectrum of the choices that I can make to improve the quality of my life and the lives of my friends and family around me. And it's almost like it's funny to talk about. It's no mystery that the pharmaceutical industry has an agenda to pump pharmaceutical pills. But just using that one arm of everything that you just brought up, you just look at, like, for example, I know people personally that have cured cancer with CBD oil.
I know people who've cured cancer from water.
I know exactly. Yes, certain types of water. Or I know there's a woman in Jakarta that's curing people of thousands of patients using um, pure organic tobacco, getting them to smoke it until they get sick, blowing it all over them, getting that energy to leave their body and channel through like metal beds down into the floor. And you don't hear about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then you hear about like hydroxychloroquine, for example. I personally know doctors through my contacts in the United States, because I'm born and raised in California, who treated thousands of patients with hydroxychloroquine and zinc, treating COVID with 100% success rate.
Yeah.
And hydroxychloroquine was on the safe drugs list with the World Health Organization for 60 some odd years.
Yeah.
It was safe. When it came out that people were using HCQ successfully in the United States, they had a big smear campaign saying that it wasn't healthy.
The same in Australia. Massive in Australia.
And they shut it down. And anybody that was talking about it, they were yanking their medical licenses and everything else. Everybody should wonder what the fuck is going on there, because we're talking about an a global pandemic that's affecting everyone. It's crashing the economy and everything else. All of a sudden there's a fucking cure and they don't want people to know about it. Like, okay, conspiracy theories aside, let me look at the camera for this one. That's a fucking fact. That's a fact. And so this big smear article that came out about HCQ, what they'll do is a few months will go by and they'll pull it down. They'll say, oh, this wasn't correct. This study that says it's dangerous and everything else. And so if there can lie about that level if there can be that level of deception for something that affects every human being on the planet right now, what else are they lying about?
What else about?
You know, so I'm not out there telling people to run out in the streets and be anarchists, but I am telling people to think for your fucking damn selves and to ask questions. And if things don't add up, then they don't add up and you should ask questions. And that's essentially how I live my life.
Question that comes up all the time is, oh, have you been stressed lately? Oh, have you been stressed lately? And in my mind, I'm like, no, I work 4 or 5 hours a day. Look where I live. Look at my life. How could I be stressed?
Yeah.
And what I've kind of come to think is that perhaps that my baseline for what I know to be stressed or not stressed is not healthy. So if I feel like I'm not stressed, which I don't at the moment, well, maybe that my baseline is still a score of 3 or 4 instead of a 0. And maybe I've never experienced my whole life a state of non-stress. I'm sure there's been moments, right? So this is why I asked the question. Can, like somebody like me, how can people actually recognize
whether they're chronically stressed
whether they have stress or not?
I feel like you're one of the very lucky, fortunate souls that you don't. Most of the clients that I work with, and just judging from my own internal world, which is really my baseline of understanding of everything, is more about, because I feel like we vilified stress, just like we vilified being in fight or flight side of the nervous system. Yeah. Being in fight or flight is not a bad thing. We need to be in fight or flight. When we go into an important meeting, when we are in exercise mode, when we're having sex, when we're doing anything that requires us to be active, we need that fight or flight. We need that stress because it helps our bodies and our minds adapt to the world. You know what I mean? So there's a big difference between healthy stress, which is what it sounds like you're up against, and really unhealthy stress. Like a lot of entrepreneurs, I think the percentage of is that when I was doing this study recently, because entrepreneur is kind of my avatar, if you will, because my ideal client was me 3 years ago, is chronically stressed to the point of feeling numb and unable to work because it's so intense. 48% report going into that state from time to time. And that's a state where you're almost paralyzed to be able to be productive. And so focus is gone, concentration is gone.
Not sleeping properly.
Irregular sleeping patterns, clarity. Like I'm one of the lucky ones when it comes to sleep. No matter what's going on in my fucking life, I'll lay my head down and sleep like a baby.
These days I'm good
for 8 hours. I mouth tape. We could talk about that later, so I can train myself to breathe through the nose at night. But they know it. There's not a. I wonder if I'm really stressed. Like they know that they're really stressed. And the thing about these states is that they're states of being that we're traveling and traversing through no matter what we have going on in life. Every moment we're in some kind of a state. I'm calm, I'm relaxed, I'm hyperactive, I'm stressed, I feel anxious, I feel really productive, I feel a lot. These are all states. And depending on what's going on with the external inputs in our world, it's driving us to have some kind of a state inside. The issue is that most people are slaves to their whatever mental state that they're in. They might have a mindfulness practice or a meditation practice that they do to hedge against these things that come up. But usually when I ask people, what's your protocol? What do you do when you're really stressed out? They usually look at me like a deer in headlights. Like, what do you mean there's an option? And the reality is that breathing is it's the best tool for state change. It's like, if I want energy and activation, I have a breathwork technique that I can do in 2 minutes that will give me the energy and the focus and the concentration and the clarity. If I'm way too pumped up and I need to come down, there's a breathwork technique that I can do that's going to lower my heart rate, lower my blood pressure, trigger my parasympathetic nervous system, tell my body it's time to rest and digest. So I'm no longer a slave to my state of being, to my state of mind, because now I have tools that can shift it no matter what is going on.
So I never knew how to breathe. Nobody ever taught me to breathe. My parents didn't know. I remember in school getting taught about the food pyramid, which is another rabbit hole we could talk about. But
no agenda there.
But then nobody ever said, this is how you breathe. They said, this is how you eat and what you should eat. But nobody told me how to breathe. So what are we doing wrong with our breathing?
So there's a few great questions. There's a few layers to it. So what the science is now showing, if you go back and you look at, this is a lot of layers to this one. And obviously I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but if you go back and you look at skulls and artifacts from hundreds of thousands of years ago, all the skeletons had perfectly straight teeth. So our fucked up teeth, I have them on my bottom. That has happened over the course of the last, let's just say, since maybe right before pre-industrial revolution, and pre-massive agriculture. And so we started eating very processed foods and foods that have been made soft and everything else. So we're chewing less. So when we chew less, our bone structure builds in a different way. And as a result, the biggest problem is that we've become mouth breathers to some extent. And so the biggest issue is that as a result, if you look at a baby breathing, you're going to see a baby breathing slow and controlled, but deep through their nose into their belly. It's the healthy way of breathing. And if you watch a lot of adults, 90% of adults, they're switching from their nose to their mouth, and we're chronically over breathing. So instead of breathing deep, but light, not a lot of oxygen, deep and long breaths into our belly, into our diaphragm, we're breathing short and shallow into our chest. And what happens when we do that, if you think about it, watch a lot of people breathe. You won't see most people breathing into their abdomen. We're breathing slow and shallow into our chest. And as we do that, essentially what's happening is we are triggering our bodies to be in a state of chronic stress. If people think, I have anxiety, so I'm a shallow breather. It's the other way around. You have anxiety because you're a shallow breather. And so shallow breathing has It leads to...
And it's a loop. That's a self-fulfilling loop.
It's a self-fulfilling loop. You end up with snoring and sleep apnea and bad circulation and heart problems and respiratory illnesses and issues. And that's all as a result of our light, shallow breathing. And the biggest thing is that it constricts this thing called vasoconstriction. So your blood vessels are tightening, and there's bronchial constriction. Your airways are tightening. So as a result, you don't have good circulation flow through the body. And all of this, if you think about chronic stress on its own, what potential illnesses chronic stress leads to, there's volumes and encyclopedias written on this very thing. Chronic stress can lead to cancer if left unchecked.